All right, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Happy to be with you here this evening for this really incredible tasting with our friend, my friend, and he will be yours here soon, Michael Kennedy. As you're kind of getting set, as you're getting settled here, whether you have the wines or not, we're gonna get lunch here in a couple minutes, but get comfy and we'll begin here in a minute. So again, happy to be with everybody here tonight for this really cool tasting about a really unique story here in the wine world. Michael, I love, we both have kind of like cool settings tonight. You have
I know.
That I was so lucky to see your building when I came to visit, and just all the like little nooks and crannies there. So for those of you that don't know, Michael's in, it's like an old bank, right, in St. Louis. Is that?
It's an old. It's actually an old hardware manufacturing plant, but it was built in 1849. So it's really old and awesome, and I love it. So
very cool, very cool.
Yeah. We do have a lot of nooks. We've got a bank vault right in front of our right in front of the entrance to the office and everything. It's super cool.
That's, I think, what had stuck in my head is I knew that there was something that was being hidden and saved there somewhere within that building. So
we use that for our champagne storage. So
as meant to be. I love those. I've seen a few restaurants that have been old bank vaults and things like that have turned into it. And what a perfect place to build a cellar than a bank vault. Works on so many levels.
Yeah. I wish the old combination like crank thing worked. That would be awesome. But we just have a padlock on it.
Something for for phase 2 of the design.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see how well this tasting goes. Maybe we can afford it after that.
There you go. So it's all about spreading the word here. All about spreading the word. Very cool. Well, as everyone's getting comfortable here, we'll go ahead and get started here in a minute. So if you're opening up any of the delicious wines that you may have got, or you're sharing with us live on either here Zoom or on Facebook, again, happy to be with you. And Michael, let's go ahead and get started here. Let's start chatting away. In having many a conversation with you about everything that you're doing here. I know that we could talk for the next 24 hours and still not get everything. And so let's go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know, I'll be your bus driver this evening, your MC, and talking about these amazing wines. My name is Jon McDaniel. I am a sommelier and wine professional of all kind of different ilks, based in Chicago, but I'm in the middle of nowhere, New York tonight. So there's this kind of fireplace here in my hotel behind you, so that adds a little bit of ambiance. It is live, it's not a Zoom background. And I'm really happy to introduce my friend, and someone that over the last few years I've really come to admire in a lot of different ways. When I think that I'm busy, and everybody tells me that I'm really busy, every time that I talk to Michael, he puts me to shame. As you're going to learn over the next hour or so, just all the amazing things that Michael is doing with all of his different wine projects. You look at how one person can handle all of that and be a husband and a dad all at the same time. Every day I'm amazed by all that you do. So happy to welcome the owner and founder of Vin Fraîche and all the amazing projects, Michael Kennedy. Michael, thank you for joining us here tonight for this little fireside chat. Hey, there we go. About your amazing wines.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, it's so great to be here. And I was just telling my wife before we started, I was like, it's pretty cool, even though I have to be at work right now. I mean, I get to drink wine with my buddy John, and that's a hard night for me. So yeah, I'm busy, but I mean, we make wine and sell wine, and there could be worse ways to be busy for sure.
Absolutely. And I know that you have, an interesting story of how you got to winemaker, how you got to producer and owner, and it really all kind of starts out, in our space, in the sommelier and the restaurant world. So how did you get started, here in wine?
Yeah. So when I graduated from college, which was 2009. I don't know if anyone remembers, but it wasn't necessarily a great time in the economy. And yeah, I wanted to work for the CIA, believe it or not. Not the Culinary Institute of America, the other one. And I had a major in French, studied a little bit of wine and things in college, but ended up not getting that job or any other job. And so I started working part-time at a tasting bar in a small winery outside of St. Louis, where I'm from. And yeah, I fell in love. I had the awesome opportunity to work with, I think, do you know Allison Gorsuch, John?
I do. I actually did a work with her a couple of months ago in LA.
Oh, that's awesome. So
Yeah.
she was kind of like my first wine mentor. She happened to be transitioning from a position in California to something. And so she ended up working at the winery with me for about 6 months. And she was studying for her advanced sommelier certification at the time. And I had no certifications. I was 21. And I just remember her being like so smart and so gracious. And yeah, it inspired me. And I said, I want to be more like this chick. And so I did. I studied. She helped me through it, and some other friends like Andrei Ivanov. And yeah, I was fresh out of college, working in a tasting room. I had no girlfriend. I had nothing to do. So I studied like crazy and passed my certified that year. And then a couple years after that, decided if I really was going to try and make great wine someday, I probably should go out and actually taste great wine. And I didn't have the money to do that. So as you know, the next best thing is to become a sommelier in a nice restaurant, because you actually get to taste that stuff and you have to pay for it.
It's a great racket for sure.
You can help people curate their dinner, and usually if you're nice enough, if your customers are gracious enough, a lot of times the guest will share a sip of Grand Cru Burgundy with you or something. So I took the wine director, the sommelier role at the Ritz-Carlton in DC when I was I think 24, and moved to DC. Didn't really know anyone. Met some cool people like Brent Kroll and some great DC somms. Kind of got my first taste of what great wine was. I'd had decent bottles with friends and stuff before, but this is when I really started to kind of understand like the classics in the world, which was pretty foundational looking back, understanding, class growth Bordeaux, classed Burgundies, things like that. And then within the Ritz-Carlton, there's this kind of dream job from the day I started I wanted, and that was the wine director role for the Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman, which is also the home of the sister restaurant to Le Bernardin in New York, which is Blue by Eric Ripert. And then that's also where we house the Food and Wine Festival called Cayman Cookout. So I got to work with Eric Ripert, Anthony Bourdain, Jose Andres, all these amazing people. And they were all so kind and gracious and generous with information and feedback. So yeah, that's kind of my start through it all.
And that brings us to that transition, and as sommeliers, as wine professionals, we always look to like, yeah, I'd love to do harvest one day, or I'd love to maybe make some wine with somebody one day. You took that and made an entire like life shift out of that. So how did you get from Grand Cayman to Napa, and to really, I was kind of counting in my head all the different sites that you work with. What was that transition like?
Well, it was accidental, like all good transitions. I was going from a casual French bistro in DC within the hotel to running like a 3-star Michelin-esque service. And I realized pretty fast, stepping on the floor of Blue, that I was way in over my head, and I needed to learn. And at a place like Blue, people don't expect you to know just a good vintage or a good variety of whatever. They want to know that the winemaker and their grandma and the dog and all that stuff. And so I started to, I had to start traveling to wine regions and meeting these people. And I was on a trip to Napa one time. I was, I don't know, maybe it'd been my fourth or fifth time to Napa, but it was the first time as the buyer there. So it was a very different experience, as you know, how it changes depending on who you work for. And yeah, I was at Bryant Family Vineyard up on Pritchard Hill. I was talking about wine with their winemaker, whose name is Mark Gagnon at the time. And I don't know. I think I was trying to prove to him how much I knew about wine. And we were talking about Bordeaux varieties and how they, you know, what role they play in a blend and all of this. And I think at that point he could tell I didn't really have much real world experience with winemaking.
Sure.
And he walks into the cellar with me, takes a glass, puts it under a concrete tank of wine and pours me some. And he's like, "Hey, what do you think this is?" Which is kind of a jerk move of Mark, you know?
Oh, he does. I got to experience
Did he do that to you too?
that as well. Yeah. That's his guess.
He's the best. And I put my nose in the glass and I had no register for it. I mean, it was like an Indian spice shop or something, you know, just like totally wild and out there. And it ended up being Petit Verdot, 100% Petit Verdot, which is I think 2% in their blend there. And you know, I'm in a restaurant at this point that has a top 100 wine program in the world. You know, one of the best chefs in the world, and I was humbled. I'll put it that way, because if you read about Petit Verdot, it talks about it as if it's this like big, inky, like thick red wine, and this wasn't. This was rustic, medium-bodied, vibrant, like electric red wine. And it hit me pretty hard because I was so wrong and it was so good and it was just so different. And I remember thinking that like, what an amazing experience. What a cool, like behind the scenes experience, you know? And it just haunted me for a couple months. And I remember I was in the shower one morning and it just kind of hit me. That would be an experience worth sharing with people, you know, the experience of tasting these pieces that are always blended together on their own. It's a very simple concept. So I called Heidi Barrett, who I call her a friend, but you know, we bought wine from her and she was friendly with me. I'd like to think we're friends, but
well, if you had Heidi's number, I mean, that's step one, you know. Yeah. If she gave that to you, then you must that's a small list of people.
Yeah. And she was so sweet. I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about wouldn't it be kind of cool if I bottled some of these pieces of a blend on their own and gave people an experience of like tasting the components?" And I remember her just saying like, like, I don't know, never thought about like what that would be, you know. For her, I think it was interesting because she thought as a winemaker, once you make a blend that the wines, you know, come together. And I think in her mind, she was thinking about what they would taste like down the road, you know, like what would a Petit Verdot she was going to put into, you know, Au Sommet or something. What would that taste like in 10 years? So I think it was interesting enough for her based on her reaction that I was really encouraged. And I thought, you know what, I think we're going to do this. So we actually bought 2 barrels of wine from a winemaker in 2013 with I had no money at the time. I was working in a restaurant, you know, and we made 2 barrels and that did pretty well. And then in 2014, we made enough to make 16 barrels and then kind of tried to grow it a little bit every year. But in the 2014 vintage, which we released in 2016, toward the end of that year, I got a call from Forbes magazine and I got this beautiful voicemail about being nominated for 30 Under 30. And then sure enough, early January, I found out I made the list, and then wine became a lot easier to sell. And then later in that year, we started a conversation with the winemaking team from Chateau Linge-Bage to do the same thing, to bottle single vineyard, single variety wines in Bordeaux. So we have 3 vineyards we work with there, 3 Ludites, and we make 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot from Bordeaux at a really, really high level. Like one of our vineyards is planted 2,000 years ago. It's a cool spot to make wine for sure. and then we started another project with some other people, and on and on and on. But that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into our first wine, which is the Semillon. And so, when you look at component and what such a great way to describe, when we think of, Bordeaux grape varieties, we don't think of the individual components. We think of the painted picture. We think of what it already looks like. And we don't think of the individual parts of those sometimes, with all the kind of different unique blends. You just think of that kind of house style. But what I love about what you do so component, it sits both in Bordeaux and in Napa. And so, pour, definitely, if you haven't already, pour that Semillon in there, and we'll start that component conversation. And so how does that work, where you have component Bordeaux, as you described, those 3 Ludis, those 3 100% grape variety wines, and then what you have with Napa. And so our first 2 wines tonight are the Semillon and that Napa Merlot under component.
Yeah, I mean, we try to approach winemaking, for example, the Semillon, we're not trying to make that anything other than an awesome expression of Semillon from the place it's grown. I think that Semillon is a really misunderstood variety. Actually, a lot of these single varieties are, which is why what we do is so relevant. People taste Semillon for the first time and they're expecting this kind of like waxy hay and honey experience. And if anyone is drinking this right now, this thing is like wildly aromatic. It's fresh, it's crisp, it's salty, it's yeasty, it has this kind of apricot citrus thing going on, and it's pretty wild. And in Bordeaux, if we were to make this in Bordeaux, we don't currently do a white wine. We would just try to reflect what Semillon in Bordeaux is. I see David Parker said it's peppery too. Absolutely. It has this like spice, this white pepper spice to it that I just love, especially on the palate. So when we approach California and Bordeaux, we're not trying to make Bordeaux wines in California, and we're not trying to make California wines in Bordeaux. We're really just trying to harvest at a time when we think the wines are phenologically ripe. We're trying to produce them in a way that allows the vineyard and the variety to come across in kind of a raw, unmasked way. And the Merlot is a great example. But yeah, so I do think this Semillon is something that we should chat about in terms of kind of where it comes from, because all these wines have a really unique story. Well,
and what I love about, as I look at kind of all the wines that I know, that you make, when you talk about the vineyard sources that you work with, Michael, it's not just like, oh yeah, we found this really cool block of Semillon. We found this really cool block, and oh, by the way, it's 120 years old. That's kind of a thread that I see through all of the different vineyards you work through, is that it's basically one of the oldest examples wherever you're working with. And that's what, we look at this Monte Rosso vineyard for the Semillon. It's not just a vineyard that was planted, a few years ago, and it has some kind of fresh Semillon. If this is old school, kind of plantings here.
Yeah, old school is definitely true. So Monte Rosso, and you're right. I am obsessed with history, and every vineyard we work with, for Gagnon Kennedy, for example, every vineyard we work with was planted originally in the 1800s. in Bordeaux, every vineyard we work with was planted over 500 years ago. So it's definitely a fun thing. But Monte Rosso is one of the most important vineyards in California. If you're not super familiar, it's probably because it's in Sonoma, and it doesn't get as much. It doesn't get as much big time attention as To Kalon or George III or some of the great Napa sites, but it's every bit as iconic, if not more impressive than most of the other sites. So Monte Rosso was planted in 1886, and it was planted to a bunch of different things. There's a mixed black vineyard, there's Zinfandel, there's Cabernet Sauvignon, there's Semillon, there's just a bunch of wild things. But Brene Royal, who manages the vineyard, we started talking with her back in 2019, and we basically said, if there's ever a chance that the original vine, 1886 vine Semillon, becomes available, like there's nothing we won't do to get this fruit, And they had a vineyard contract fall out in 2020, and we got basically 1 acre of that parcel, the oldest parcel of Semillon. And it's made by a couple other awesome people. Bedrock makes some, and some others. But what we tried to do with this was not do anything on the winemaking side of things that would make this a non-Monte Rosso Semillon. We want it to be Semillon, but we also want it to be Monte Rosso Semillon. So we did a kind of layering of winemaking technique. So we did neutral barrel, so no new oak on this wine, and we did stainless steel. So the stainless steel to kind of preserve that freshness, kind of have that sharp fruit come through, and that purity of fruit. And then we did the neutral barrel to give it kind of like a little bit more texture on the palate. We let that sit on the lees so that it kind of sits in its own essence and gives it a little bit more depth of texture. And then we bottle it. It's a 6-month turnaround wine, and this wine could last 40 years. It's absolutely built for that. We harvest a little early. I should say, of the spectrum of when Monte Rosso is harvested, we're on the first half of that, and we believe that kind of keeps a little bit more acidity and structure in the wine. We could harvest this later and make a rounder, more opulent Semillon, but we wanted to go for a kind of more angular, fresh style.
No, certainly. No, it's interesting when you talk about Monte Rosso, and when you talk about like 19 and Brene was like kind of like she blew up in 2019. When you talk about like when you hit on Forbes, like she in 19, every article, like you want to find a rock star vineyard manager, it was her. And so really amazing. And I'm sure that her phone was ringing off the hook. So the fact that you kind of managed to sneak in some fruit, from that's pretty incredible. Now, before 20, you made Semillon in Napa and Yount Mill. If you were to find older vintages of the component Semillon versus this one, kind of what are you going to find as one kind of the thread maybe between them, and then what are some of those differences between over the hill there?
Yeah, great question. Yount Mill is a really unique space. Even though it's in Yountville, you have to drive into Oakville to get to it. So you have to go north on 29, you hit Oakville, and then you curve back around into Yountville. And it's on the eastern side of a huge little deposit in the middle of the valley, and it's kind of at the base of a wind tunnel. And so that little vineyard spot sits at multiple degrees cooler than the rest of Yountville. It's why people like Steve Mathiasen and Raj Parr and Matt Noman, they make wine from that site. Matt Noman's actually the guy who connected us to it originally in 2016. And I loved the vineyard. I would never, ever have dropped this vineyard if it wasn't for Monte Rosso. I mean, Monte Rosso is the oldest Semillon in North America. And some people say that it's the oldest Semillon in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, it is truly a historic site. Yount Mill, though, is very old as well. So 1967, it was organic since planting. It's a dream vineyard. But the difference is, weirdly enough, the Sonoma wine gets riper. It's at the top of the mountain. It's just perfectly situated for sunlight. The old vines, weirdly, are vigorous. Brene was telling me that if she let those Semillon vines go, even though they're 135 years old now, that they would just produce, like 4+ tons per acre. So it's pretty crazy. Whereas in Yountville, those vines were stressed. It's very poor soil there. And they're both head trained, meaning they're not tied to wires. So you have some unripe fruit, some ripe fruit. So overall, Yount Mill actually produced a lighter, less ripe wine than the Monte Rosso. I would never call the Monte Rosso a really ripe Semillon, but in comparison to Yount Mill, it is. Yeah.
Awesome. And when we talk about this 20 vintage, you only made 60 cases, I think, of this particular wine. So I think that kind of matches. You look at all the different wines you produce. It's these really kind of small lot, very rare aspects of it. And once people kind of get a hold of it, it's a pretty cool unicorn to find Semillon like that.
Yeah, it's actually sold out.
Exhibit A.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, we make I think 62 to 67 cases depending on yield. In 2021, we're really begging Brene for like double, which is not a lot, but double the tonnage, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, like you said, everything we do, I mean, there are some wines that we make 1 barrel of. So yeah, for us, it's more about kind of like a Burgundy approach. We're not saying that these wines are Burgundy in style, but a Burgundy approach to if this block of this vineyard is unique from the block next to it, it's fun in my mind, with a sommelier background, to make them separately. So I'm never afraid of making a barrel of wine. I think some producers are, because they're like, oh my gosh, 25 cases, it's not even worth my time, but for me, we love it.
Yeah. Well, it gives all those kind of different, unique things that are happening in your world. So, well, let's move to wine number 2 under component, which is our Merlot here. And again, when you talk about creating challenges for yourself as you look at each of the wines to create a 100% 2018 Napa Merlot, how did this kind of, when you talk about components, how did this wine kind of come together? And also, as we're looking at the label of this wine, talk a little bit too about the package itself, because it definitely has a kind of a unique story with how this wine was created.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we started this project, my wife and I were really wanting to accentuate the fact that these were isolated barrels of wine. These are not part of a blend. So we worked with a great artist out of San Francisco and his firm Alta. And the original idea was to just get a kind of a photograph label of a single barrel in an empty cellar, and so we took that picture. Actually, a really amazing photographer in Napa, Matt Morris, took this picture of a barrel, and the light was hitting it in a way that cast this really cool shadow over it, and there was a lot of depth in the picture. And so our artist was messing around with things, and he just cut the head off the barrel and put it on a white background, and I was like, oh, that does something for me. I'm a like overall very simple person, and we wanted the wine to kind of reflect that. And then as we were going through it, the artist made a comment. He said, I think that we could do something really cool to show people that you're pulling apart a blend. You're not just isolating barrels, but you're taking the blend and you're pulling it into its pieces, and that's how you're allowing your customers to experience wine. And then, so we did some things, and he actually broke the photo into the 4-color spectrum, and he pulled all 4 color layers out as if you were pulling apart a blend, the blend being the total color spectrum. And so there's actually 4 colors that are pulled apart there. Yeah, perfect. So it's really cool. Although people have very mixed feelings about our labels. There's a wine critic. I know you know where I'm going with this. My favorite article that was ever written about us was in Bloomberg. And I was sitting at home on Facebook one day, and someone posted an article, and it was like 6 amazing wines with terrible labels. And I was like, oh God, it would suck to be on that list. And I click it, I start reading, I see 2 of my friends on there, and then sure enough, I see Component Wine Company.
There you go.
She loved the wine, she just hated the label. I think she said it looked like a printer test page malfunction or something. So
well, that in itself is inspiring, but as they say, no bad press exists. So
yeah, that's true.
They're talking about you, but so as we look at our next wine here, and obviously you make 2 different Merlots. You make one in Bordeaux, and so before we kind of get into the Napa one, I know that the single Ludi in Bordeaux was definitely an inspiration for creating in California. So if you can kind of take a step back and let's sit in Bordeaux for a second with your Ludi Merlot.
So in 2016, so we made a Merlot in Bordeaux before we ever attempted one in California, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. One is people have a ton of misconceptions about what Merlot in California is. And second, I'm obsessed with Bordeaux Merlot. So that was really the main reason. But as we were, going through the process of looking for these different vineyards, we were working with a guy who runs kind of the custom crush side of Lynch Bage, and his name is Stephen Bolger. And an amazing man named Eric Boissonneau, who's the consultant for Margaux, Mouton, Lafite, Latour. And I told him, I said, look, I really want a Merlot that is going to be a Merlot, not a Merlot that tastes like a cab or anything like that. I want it to be like a classical Bordeaux Merlot. And this is the guy I'm talking to at the time. He's the guy who helps blend Margaux, Mouton, Lafite, Latour. I mean, like, if anyone should know what classical Bordeaux Merlot is, right. Maybe Christian Moex and a couple others that maybe further. But so he pointed me to this single Ludite called La Pyramide. We actually renamed the Ludite to La Colline in 2019 vintage. It's the same Ludite, and it's sandwiched between 3 things: Chateau Pavie, which is amazing, Chateau Trollon-Mondo, another amazing chateau, and then a 2,000-year-old quarry, limestone quarry that the Romans dug around the year 0, actually around the year 59 BC. But yeah, so it's clay limestone. It is super classical Bordeaux Merlot, and that was kind of exactly what we wanted. And then the question became down the road, how are we going to express Merlot in Napa? There's no kind of classical style of Merlot because it's taken so many swings in style over the years.
Right.
What is our benchmark? And so we had to drink a lot of Merlot in Napa to kind of really see which producers we felt like were making great wine, but weren't over making it or under making it, or making it taste not like the variety. So it took us a long time to find a site that we were happy with. Mark Gagnon, the guy who poured me that wine at Bryant, is now my partner and winemaking genius, and he's helped me a lot. So 2018 is our first vintage. So 3 years after Bordeaux, which was already years in the making. And we always said we wouldn't make a Napa Merlot until we felt like we could make a kind of like a retro style Napa Merlot. So that doesn't mean we're trying to dictate a style that Merlot should be in Napa. We just felt like Merlot can take on so many personalities. I mean, John, you know how it is. Every country,
Yeah.
it seems, produces Merlot in a different way. Tuscany, Bordeaux, Napa, Australia. I mean, it just goes on and on. Chile. So we wanted a wine that was clearly a wine grown in a warm, sunny climate, which is what Napa Valley is. We wanted it to reflect its volcanic soil, which is what Napa Valley is. But it's grown in Coombsville, right? So that's a really cold part of Napa Valley. It's the second coolest AVA next to Carneros. So we also wanted it to have balance and acid and spice and meatiness, and so it was an exciting endeavor, but it's kind of a leafy, spicy, medium-bodied, racy Merlot, and to me, that's how I see Napa Merlot, and that's what I want to see in Napa Merlot. So
sure. When you talk about Coombsville and you talk about this, site being, definitely one of the colder places in Napa, and that coupled with the fact that Merlot has such a long development and growing season, how does Coombsville kind of, dictate a little bit of that development of Merlot that may be different from kind of some of the other sites around Napa when it comes to Merlot specifically?
So Merlot is one of the first grapes to ripen. So if you put it in a warm area, it's its sugars will go fast, but it doesn't necessarily mean that because the sugar's there, the phenolics, the flavors are there. So when you're looking for like a Merlot site, you want a cooler site. And Coombsville, being so close to the San Pablo Bay, offers you that kind of for example, I mean, I remember Steve Mathiasen posted a temperature grid of Napa Valley the other day, and it showed it was 108 degrees in Calistoga and 82 degrees in Coombsville. It's a huge temperature difference. I mean,
a little swing there.
Yeah, it's like not even the same country.
Yeah.
But on top of it, it's geographically located this way to kind of naturally welcome that breeze off the San Pablo once it starts warming up. So I think your question was, how does Coombsville imprint on the wine, right?
Right.
And beyond just the temperature, it sits on the Vaca mountain range, the eastern mountain range. This particular site is in a collapsed volcano. It has compressed ash, and it's a tough spot. It's a really tough, and clay and iron, and it's a tough spot for vines to grow. And Merlot, if left to its own devices in very fertile, thin, pumicey volcanic soil, and I know you know this, it will grow bushes of leaves. It'll expend all of its energy on green matter and no energy on grapes other than like sugar production. And so what ends up happening when you're not like strangling Merlot is these wines get really like ripe and fruity and juicy, and they can be really nice, but having a little bit more density in the soil and like less fertile soil where the vines are spending enough energy or spending more energy digging to find nutrients, that's when Merlot can be what I think like as like phenolically complex. And that happens in Coombsville. There's a lot of producers that are investing in Cabernet Franc and Merlot in Coombsville. It's where Favia is. It's where, I mean, Philippe Melka is buying so much fruit out of Coombsville right now. This vineyard, Caldwell Vineyard, which is our home site, it's, I don't know. There's no fruit available to buy anymore because it's just that it's like the hottest region, the most trendy region in Napa Valley right now.
The hottest, coolest place.
Coolest,
for Cabernet and for
ice
Merlot.
hot.
Yes, icy hot, perfect. So as you know, and again, this is another wine that when we talk about small production, this is also around kind of like 60 cases, in production as well. And when you look at each of those individual kind of pieces. And so before we get to wine number 3, I want to take a sharp left here, and knowing that you produce, these really kind of small lot collectible wines, you also have a wine brand that you produce that has a little bit kind of larger production that gives a little bit more kind of approachability and understanding to your thought, and that is State of Mind. And so I wanted to see if you could kind of touch on the thought process behind State of Mind a little bit, and those are wines that can be a little bit more accessed out there in the world.
Yeah. State of Mind was something that happened. You've been a sommelier how many years, John?
Long time, 10 years plus 10 on the other side, something like that.
Yeah. So over a decade, even over 5 years, if I've been a sommelier since 2009, like 12 years now. Even over like 5 years, you will meet, if you're in a good program, you will meet amazing people. I mean, people that you just couldn't even, you're reading about in books, and then one day they walk in with wine to sell you, and it's so cool. And I had so many of those experiences where I was lucky enough to meet like winemakers and sommeliers that I just totally looked up to and admired. And we were down in Cayman Cookout one year, and one of these guys, Larry Stone, and his winemaker Tomas Abra, I was saying, oh, blah, blah, something about component and what we were doing in Bordeaux. And they were like, well, you should make a wine with us sometime. That'd be so fun, And they're in Oregon. They own, I assume everyone knows who Larry Stone is, but if you don't, he has a winery in Oregon called Lingua Franca with Dominique Lafon and Thomas. And they make some of the best wines Oregon has ever seen, hands down. And so anyway, we're having this conversation, and I was like, haha, yeah, that'd be awesome. We should make a wine, and then I emailed them, I don't know, a couple of weeks later, and I said, it'd be really cool to kind of collaborate on a wine. And they really let me and my team of, as you know, we have a lot of sommeliers that work on our team and winemakers. So they let us kind of direct that, but we make 300 cases of Chardonnay and 400 cases of Pinot Noir from the Larry Stone Vineyard at Lingua Franca. And we make it with Thomas at Lingua Franca. They're very different wines than Lingua Franca, and that's kind of intentional. But the idea of State of Mind is collaboration and winemaking by panel. I say it all the time, but if I'm going to go make a wine, I'm going to make the wine that I love. If I'm going to make Chardonnay, I'm going to go make it in my favorite style of Chardonnay. When you open that winemaking decision to 10 people, we all are not going to have the same favorite wines. And so it kind of steers a rudder in a different direction. And it's led to some really wild things and some cool wines that, like the Chardonnay, for example, is this dual style of kind of half reductive, half oxidative, not oxidative, but oxygen friendly, soft, elegant, and then rigid and grippy and linear. And no one would make that wine normally. So it's been a cool project. We make a single vineyard Riesling in Washington. That's our largest production wine, 650 cases. So yeah, it's been great. The wines are stellar. It's like the Chardonnays by the glass at Spruce in San Francisco. People blinded on it are calling it like Chassagne Marachais and stuff like that. So I'm pretty proud of those wines too. And they're a lot more affordable. They're $65 a bottle.
But I think that's the range of those things, and it's really cool. And I've done this a couple of times now, of tasting State of Mind, against Lingua Franca, and to see from the same site, same people in the room, that you can get such different wines just by looking at those stylistic choices. And I think it's really cool to see what's being produced up there. So you'd referenced this we a few times in your tastings and thought processes, and you'd mentioned this guy Mark a few times, and I know that our last wine here that we talk about, our Napa Valley Cuvee under Gagnon Kennedy, was a project that almost didn't happen. Talk to me about how Gagnon Kennedy Vineyards started, and how it was maybe a little bit more than Mark thought that he was taking on.
Yeah, definitely is, I think. So, the guy who kind of gave me the experience that led me to create Component Wine Company was Mark Gagnon, who was the winemaker at Bryant at the time. Right before Bryant, he was the assistant winemaker at Screaming Eagle. And, you know, he's just he's a brilliant guy. He's half artist. He's half scientist. He's dead serious and super fun at the same time. You know, you've spent time with him in the cellar. He's a riot.
All with he's kind of like halfway between Safari Guide and Steve the Crocodile Hunter.
Yeah.
With a ponytail, you know, all those kind of things. And, you know, you had referenced
like
that kind of like, yeah. And like my 5-second, you know, story when I see with Mark, when he did the same thing to me, that Petit Verdot, but he did it with a tank of Tannat. He's like, what is this? I'm like, I have no clue. And, you know, that classic California Tannat, of course. So a great guy. And so that's, you know, when you look at this, our last wine here, you know, I know that it almost didn't happen.
Yeah. So we'd stayed friends since that day in 2014, I think is when it was. And every time, you know, I was around, we'd go hang out by his pool and drink wine, and mostly beer actually, probably. But yeah. And we, you know, in the summer of 2018, we were sitting by the pool and he's like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm leaving Bryant. And I was like, you're what? You're leaving, you know, one of the greatest estates in Napa Valley. What are you going to do? You know, where do you go from there? You already worked at Screaming Eagle. You know, he's like, I don't know. I think I'm going to just figure it out and take a harvest off. So I remember saying, why don't you make your own wine? And he's like, well, you know, I love making wine. I don't know if I'd love the business of wine so much. He's like, why don't we make a wine? You know, why don't we do it together? And I was like, no, man, I have 2 wineries already. Like I can't, I have a 1-year-old at home. My wife would kill me. I thought I was saying the right thing there. Right. And he didn't push it, you know, it was just kind of like this joking conversation about let's make a wine together, and kind of like with Larry. And anyway, I went home and I told Rachel about it, and she basically smacked me around and was like, one of the best winemakers in the world wants to make wine. She was like, she loves Mark. Everyone loves Mark who beats him. But so I called him back a couple of days later, and I was like, hey, you know, maybe we should talk about this. But we both agreed really early on. We said, you know, if we're going to make a wine in Napa, you know, we got to get some things straight. We're not going to just create some brand where we're trying to drive a ton of exclusivity and, you know, make this like, the tacky things that are done, you know what I mean? Like, you know, constantly telling people you're sold out. Like, we don't want you to buy our wine, but we do, you know, like, so we decided, you know, like, let's approach this in kind of an old school way and just try to make really awesome wines from really awesome vineyards. We'll make it not about us. We'll make it about the site. And, you know, we'll try to just be authentic and tell our story. And so originally we thought, you know, hey, why don't we go find, and I think you and I have talked about this before, but the original idea was, why don't we go find one of these pre-Prohibition wineries that didn't make it after Prohibition, you know, like stone ruins in the mountains, and, you know, they exist still, which is wild.
Making hooch in the background kind of a place.
Like your old stone barn, and you made 10 barrels and, you know, whatever. But we realized pretty quickly we didn't have $20 million laying around to do that. So we talked to some friends. I remember a conversation I had with Robin Lale, and, you know, she, in her most elegant, amazing way, said, you know, honey, all the best vineyards in Napa were planted in the first 40 years. And I was like, no. And I was like, oh my God, she's right. But you got to think about it, right? So Napa was settled in the 1840s by almost purely European immigrants. And if you had grown up for 1,000 years of generations in Missouri cornfield, you don't even need to think about it. You look around and you know corn's going to grow well there, soybeans going to grow well there. And then these guys come to Napa and they're like, okay, that's an amazing vineyard site based on the growth and like, you know, all these, you know, just by looking, you could tell Tokalan was going to be an amazing space. So I also was reading a book at the time called Napa, and it goes into the history of the valley. And I was really inspired by that. And so we started thinking, okay, we're not rich enough to do it, you know, with a physical space and tell the history of that space. But, you know, the most important thing anyway, which we talked about in the beginning, was we want to work with the most important vineyards, most historically significant. So we made a rule and we said everything in Gagnon Kennedy has to be planted in the 1800s originally, you know, and that kept us from down the road as we grow, you know, throwing in, you know, 10 new acres of land we buy in the backside of Howell Mountain or something, and you know,
right.
So anyway, we started calling people, and Mark, with his winemaking background, was getting a lot of answered phone calls. I wasn't getting very many, and he called Andy Beckstoffer and just said, hey, you know, we'd love to work with Missouri Hopper. And then they said, you know, for you, Mark, of course.
There you go.
So we got that vineyard, you know, originally planted in the 1870s. We work with a relatively unknown vineyard that was one of the first 5 vineyards in the valley, which was the Samuel Brandon Vineyard up in Calistoga, planted by the guy who founded the city of Calistoga. I had to go back into historical record and find plans and maps and photos from the 1860s to find out exactly when it was planted. And we work with the George III Vineyard, which is part of the old George de la Tour wines from BV, planted in the 1890s. We work with Monte Rosso, 1886. We work with the old federal block of Tokalan, the old UC Davis research block that was part of the 1881 planting. Kind of the reason Cabernet Sauvignon exists in Napa Valley right now is because of that vineyard. So it's an amazing project, and Mark is doing brilliant things with the wines. We try to make them in a classical way, whatever that means for Napa Valley. But it's been great, and the Cuvee, the wine number 3, is kind of our homage to Krug champagne, which I'll explain. So we have all these.
You perk some ears up there in the audience once you talk about Napa Cabernet and Krug. All right, let's see what this guy is all about.
So I remember hearing a story about Joseph Krug saying that if the Napa or if the Grand Cuvée would benefit from having Clos d'Ambonnet, you know, their insane tiny Pinot Noir vineyard that when it is bottled, I think is like $3,500 a bottle. He said that the Cuvée is what needs to be, because the Cuvée is Krug, you know, and one of our most important things is we want our friends to be able to afford our wine, you know, and drink our wine. And Napa's gotten just so expensive. I mean, Mark's used to making $1,000 bottles of wine, and none of his friends could go around drinking bottles that he made. He could barely bring a bottle because they're just, you know, it's just so scarce. So our Napa Valley Cuvée is mine and Mark's expression of Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, and we do not declassify press wine or lesser barrels into the Cuvée. We want the Cuvée to be one of the best wines we make. It's our most affordable. It's the, you know, it's the symphony of Gagnon Kennedy, whereas each of the single vineyards are like, you know, a cello, a violin, you know, bass. Those single vineyards, they all have these amazing expressions on their own. And the Cuvée is our way of saying, like, now listen to them all together. These don't get rejected barrels. These get first A+ barrels. This $95 goes further than you can imagine. I don't know if anyone's drinking it right now. I hope you guys are loving it.
That's when
Yeah.
I first, when I first saw that wine, and you look at, all right, all of the different things you just talked about of the history of all these individual vineyards, and you talk about the pedigree that Mark has and all these different things, and oh yeah, it's a $95 bottle of Napa Cabernet. Like those don't necessarily all equate to each other. So it's really amazing to see that is now is kind of truly become the calling card of what the inspiration to this wine's all about.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's a wine that I'm proud to bring. I'm proud of all. As you know, I love every single bottle that we make. I would stop making it if I didn't love it. But it's one of the wines that I think is most evocative of what we're trying to do. So it's a great wine to share with people, and honestly, it drinks so well. I think a lot of people, when they see the most affordable wine in a portfolio, they're like, oh, it's the entry level, it's the whatever.
Right.
And as you know from Krug would tell you their best wine is the Grand Cuvée. Mark tells people the technically best wine, even though we make a $250 bottle, the technically best wine, in his opinion, the most expressive and complex, is the Cuvée.
And so when you look at, the extension of that conversation as well as, okay, well, if it's the entry level wine, it also doesn't have, maybe the best ageability. Talk to me a little bit about what you and Mark see the longevity of the Cuvée, given, all of the different, components that go into, this wine.
Great question. The Cuvée is it's an artist palette of a wine, right? So it's the one we construct. The single vineyards are what they are, and some of those single vineyards won't last as long as the others. That doesn't make them better or worse. It just makes them what they are, based on tannin and acid and things like that. The Cuvée was built to just gracefully get better for the next 20, 25 years, and then hopefully gracefully slide back a little into subtlety. And I see this wine being one of the longest lasting wines we have. And you've tasted it. I mean, structurally, it's not going anywhere.
Well, and that's I teed you up there for a reason. If you look at traditional Napa Cabernet versus kind of what people think of it today are very different stories. You look at what people were producing in the 70s and 80s, and the longevity of those wines versus kind of what's coming out now. When I first tasted this wine, like, this is like the traditional like arc of what Napa is about. And so I saw this wine has those kind of notes to it when you taste some of those kind of early amazing wines that came from Napa Valley.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's kind of like the inspiration for what we're doing, is like the old Georges de Latour and Inglenook's and gosh, even the old Mayacamas wines, and just seeing where those are at now, and then seeing where some of these 100 pointers from 97 are in comparison. There's a 20-year difference between the two, and the 20-year older one can be tasting so much better than those massive wines from the 90s.
Right.
That's inspiring to me. I think Mark and I both agree that we're not on a pendulum of style. We're trying to kind of hop off the pendulum altogether, and say, we're not going for a style. I don't know if that makes sense, but we're not going for under extraction or over extraction or whatever. We're just going for a balanced wine. So
one thing too, when you look at your inspiration starts at the vineyard, and obviously each vintage gives you such a different expression, and you start with the vineyard themselves. So I think that makes sense of what the fruit gives you from that year. That's what the final story is going to be. And I see here from Mark too, related to this wine of the blend here. So typically when you hear Cuvee, you think of different parcels, and you think of different grape varieties as well. But what is this Napa Valley Cuvee composed of?
Yep, this is almost 100% Cabernet. We splashed a couple percent of Petit Verdot in just for nostalgia. No, we do have a tiny bit of Pritchard Hill Petit Verdot from the Cuvee Vineyard, and it just gives it a dash of hot sauce. It's by all means 100% Cab, maybe 1% Petit Verdot. So.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, as we're wrapping up here, because again, as I said, we could continue to talk forever, but want to see if there are any final questions from any of our attendees here. Feel free to put them in the chat. And as you are looking for, if you have the wines and you want to access a couple more bottles, or if you haven't yet, definitely go over to Benchmark Wine and you can search for Vin Fraîche, or you can search for Component or Gagnon Kennedy to be able to grab these wines, especially this amazing Semillon, the Merlot, or the Napa Valley Cabernet Cuvée. To be able to see what these wines are all about, and to learn more about all the different amazing projects that Michael is working on, either to Vin Fraîche or to Component, or I know each of the different projects has its own site, but Vin Fraîche is kind of that umbrella there. And we didn't even, and so maybe for next time we can park it for talking a little bit about Tuscany and that new project for you as well.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, Jon, and thanks everyone for being here tonight. I just dropped my email in the chat, but it's worth noting that actually for some of these wines, the only place you can buy them is Benchmark, because they bought the last couple bottles of everything. So definitely, check that stuff out. But if you have any questions or anything, shoot me an email. Come visit. We just opened a cheese shed on the property in Coombsville. It was built in the 1870s, and we made it into this awesome, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like tasting lounge in the middle of a historic property. So we'd love to have anyone who's in town, or if you're visiting the Valley, to come visit us. And yeah, thanks so much, Jon, for asking wonderful questions and leading us. You know me, I can be a little talky.
It's always the role of the bus driver here. So Michael, thank you so much. Great to connect with you here tonight, and to be able to share some of these amazing wines with our attendees and the world out there in social media. Thank you as always to our friends here at Benchmark Wine Group for inviting us and inviting me to be able to share my friend Michael's amazing stuff, amazing wines. Definitely go check them out. Shoot him an email. He will reply himself, so that's always a great thing as well. He learned from the winemakers. You gotta reach out and you gotta respond. So great to be with everybody here tonight, and thank you for enjoying the wines, and we'll hope to see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Have a great night.